She took 7 knife wounds protecting a wounded soldier, and no one who stood on that quiet street the next morning ever forgot what it felt like when the Marines arrived, because the story began the night before in a narrow, broken alley behind a temporary medical outpost where chaos ruled and rules no longer mattered, where gunfire had faded but danger still breathed in the dark, and she was not a soldier by rank or uniform but by instinct and courage, a field medic who had already worked for 18 hours straight, hands shaking not from fear but from exhaustion, when the wounded soldier was dragged in by 2 men barely standing, blood soaking through his torn gear, his radio crushed, his weapon gone, and before she could even finish sealing one wound, shadows moved at the edge of the light, blades flashing instead of bullets because silence was the weapon that night, and when the attackers rushed in, trained and fast, everyone froze for half a second too long except her. Because she stepped forward without thinking, placing her body between the knives and the soldier on the table, shouting for the others to get him out, and the first strike came low, sharp, and shocking, the second across her side, the third grazing her shoulder, pain exploding but not stopping her, because she grabbed the attacker's wrist with one hand and shoved him back, using her own body as a barrier while the wounded soldier was pulled away inch by inch, and then the fourth and fifth strikes came almost together, breath knocked from her lungs, vision blurring, knees buckling but not falling, because falling meant failure and failure meant death for the man behind her, and when the sixth wound hit, she finally screamed not from fear, but from effort as she forced herself upright again, blood pooling at her boots, hands slick, heart pounding so loud it drowned out the chaos, and the seventh wound landed as the attackers fled, alarms finally sounding, backup finally arriving. Too late to stop the damage but just in time to stop the killing, and she collapsed against the wall only after she knew the soldier was gone, alive, breathing, moving towards surgery, and as medics rushed to her side, she kept asking the same question through clenched teeth and fading consciousness, is he alive, did he make it, over and over until someone finally said yes, and only then did she let herself go still, and the night swallowed her into flashing lights, sirens, and rushed hands that worked just as desperately to save her as she had worked to save him, and word spread quietly, not through announcements or medals but through whispers and radio checks, through Marines who don't exaggerate and don't forget, about a medic who stood unarmed against knives, about 7 wounds that should have dropped anyone else, about a moment where courage outweighed survival instinct, and by dawn, as the sun lifted over a city that didn't know her name, she lay unconscious in a hospital room, tubes and monitors humming softly, unaware that somewhere across the base, men in dress uniforms were standing still longer than necessary, checking the address twice, not because they doubted it, but because they wanted to be sure, and when they arrived at her door that morning, they didn't knock right away, they formed up instead, boots aligned, backs straight, faces hard but eyes heavy, and when the door finally opened, it wasn't a commander or an official statement waiting inside, it was silence, the kind that carries weight, because every Marine standing there knew exactly why they had come, and they didn't come to speak or to be thanked, they came because one of their own was alive due to someone who didn't wear their uniform, someone who chose pain over safety without hesitation, and when the door closed again, they stood a moment longer, unmoving, saluting a sacrifice that never asked for recognition, a bravery that didn't need a stage, and as they turned away one by one, the message was clear without a single word spoken, that courage is not measured by rank, that heroes don't always carry weapons, and that sometimes the strongest shield on a battlefield is a single human being who refuses to step aside, and long after the wounds healed and the scars faded into memory, that morning remained, a quiet testimony to what it means to protect another life at any cost, because legends aren't always born in victory, sometimes they're born in a moment when someone Stands still while the world tries to tear them apart. When she finally woke, the first thing she felt was weight heavy, crushing, as if the night itself was still pressing down on her chest, and the second thing she felt was pain that arrived in waves, slow and merciless, each breath pulling fire through her ribs, each heartbeat reminding her that 7 wounds were not just numbers but memories carved into flesh, and the room around her was quiet in the way only hospitals can be, where machines whisper instead of shout and time seems to move cautiously, as if afraid to disturb the fragile balance between life and loss, and she tried to move but couldn't, her body refusing orders it had obeyed without question only hours before, and when a nurse noticed her eyes open and rushed to her side, speaking softly, explaining that she was safe, that surgery had gone longer than expected but she had made it through, she didn't ask about herself, didn't ask how bad the damage was or how long recovery would take, she asked about the soldier. Again, the same way she had before losing consciousness, because that single question was the anchor that had kept her alive, and when she was told that he was stable, that he would live, tears finally came, not dramatic, not loud, just silent trails slipping into her hair as relief replaced adrenaline, and outside that room, beyond the walls she couldn't see past, the story continued to travel, carried by Marines who spoke in low voices and careful words, describing how close it had been, how knives had replaced bullets, how someone unarmed had stood their ground when trained fighters hesitated for half a breath too long, and those Marines didn't embellish the facts, didn't add heroics, because the truth alone was heavy enough, and by midday, commanders knew, squads knew, and men who had survived firefights felt something tighten in their chests that had nothing to do with fear. The wounded soldier she had protected regained consciousness later that same day, confused and disoriented, his body aching with injuries that would take months to heal, but when he was told what had happened while he was fading in and out on the table, when he learned that 7 knife wounds had been taken meant for him, he turned his face away from the room and stared at the wall, jaw clenched, eyes burning, because Marines are trained to accept danger for themselves, not for someone else to absorb it on their behalf, and he asked to see her, even though doctors warned him it would be brief, and when they finally wheeled him past her door, he didn't speak at first, he just looked at the bandages, the stillness, the proof of what she had endured, and in that moment, something settled into him that would never leave, a debt deeper than gratitude, heavier than words, and he whispered a promise he didn't yet know how to keep, and back on base, preparations were made quietly, not for ceremony or publicity, but for respect, because the Marines who decided to go to her door the next morning did not ask permission, they informed their superiors, and no one stopped them, because everyone understood that this was not about protocol, it was about honor, and that night, while she slept under the watchful glow of monitors, boots were polished, uniforms pressed, and silence carried intention. Morning arrived slowly, pale light stretching across hallways and streets that had no idea what they were about to witness, and when the Marines stepped out together, there was no chatter, no jokes, no casual movement, only measured steps and shared understanding, because every one of them knew the risks she had taken, knew that survival had come down to seconds and stubborn refusal to fall, and when they reached the building where she lived, they stopped short of the door, forming a line that was not ordered by command but by instinct, backs straight, eyes forward, hands still, and people passing by felt it immediately, that something important was happening, something heavy and wordless, and inside, when a family member opened the door and saw them standing there, perfectly still, not demanding entry, not announcing rank or reason, confusion turned quickly into understanding, because Marines do not stand like that without cause, and they spoke only a few words, explaining who she was to them, what she had done, and why they were there, and then they fell silent again, because no speech could match the weight of their presence, and that silence said everything: gratitude, respect, and recognition from those who understood the cost of courage better than most. News of that silent visit spread faster than any official report, because stories like this do not need amplification, they move naturally through shared respect, and soon others came forward with pieces of her past, stories of long nights, impossible situations, moments where she stayed calm when others broke, and it became clear that this act was not a sudden spark of bravery but the result of a person who had been choosing others over herself again and again without recognition, and as days passed, her condition stabilized, surgeries gave way to recovery plans, and pain became something she learned to live with rather than fight, and when she finally heard about the Marines at her door, she didn't react the way people expected, she didn't smile for attention or ask why they had come, she simply closed her eyes for a long moment, overwhelmed not by pride but by the knowledge that the life's